there was a man named Bronkhorst. He was a middle-aged man in the army, with gray hair like a badger. Some people said he had a little country blood in him, but no one could prove it. Mrs. Bronkhorst was not young, but she was 15 years younger than her husband. She was a big, quiet woman with pale skin, heavy eyelids, and weak eyes. Her hair looked red or yellow, depending on the light. Bronkhorst was not a kind man. He did not care about the little lies people tell to make life a bit nicer. He treated his wife badly. Sometimes a wife can put up with many things, even being hit with a fist, but it is hard for a wife to deal with what Mrs. Bronkhorst had to face. Bronkhorst made fun of her, talked about her weaknesses, her headaches, her happy moments, her clothes, and her small efforts to look nice for him, even though she knew she was not as beautiful as before. Worst of all, he made fun of the love she had for her children. Bronkhorst liked these mean jokes very much. Maybe it started during their honeymoon when people sometimes say silly things when they run out of kind words. It's like when someone says, "Hey, you old beast," to a horse they love. Sadly, after marriage, these jokes stayed, but the kindness was gone. This hurt Mrs. Bronkhorst more than she could say. But she still loved her Teddy, as she called him. Maybe that's why he didn't like her. Maybe this is just a guess. He felt a strange anger when he saw her face, the same face he had seen every day for many years. He knew he would have to keep seeing that face until one of them died. Many men and women know this feeling. It only lasts for a few seconds, but it feels terrible, like something from the past when people were not as good as they are now. Dinner at the Bronkhorst's house was something most men didn't like. Bronkhorst enjoyed saying things that hurt his wife. When their little boy came in after dinner, Bronkhorst would give him a little wine. The boy would get very excited, then sad, and he would start crying. Bronkhorst would ask if this was how Teddy usually behaved, and if Mrs. Bronkhorst couldn't find some time to teach the little boy to behave. Mrs. Bronkhorst, who loved her son more than her own life, tried not to cry. It seemed like her spirit was broken by her marriage. Then, Bronkhorst would say, "That's enough, that's enough. Please try to act like a proper woman. Go into the drawing room." Mrs. Bronkhorst would leave, trying to smile, while the guest at the table felt upset and uncomfortable. After 3 years of this unhappy life, because Mrs. Bronkhorst had no women friends to talk to, the whole town was shocked by the news that Bronkhorst had started a legal case against a man named Beale. Beale had been a little too friendly to Mrs. Bronkhorst when they were in public. Bronkhorst didn't care about hiding his shame, so everyone knew that the evidence against Beale was not strong. It was only based on what some local people said. There were no letters to prove anything, but Bronkhorst said he would do everything he could until Beale ended up in jail. Mrs. Bronkhorst stayed inside her house and let people say what they wanted. Some people thought Beale was guilty right away, but a few men who knew him well believed he was innocent. Beale was very angry and surprised. He said the whole thing was a lie, and he even said he wanted to beat Bronkhorst badly. We knew that no jury would find Beale guilty with just local evidence. In that country, you could even buy a false murder charge, complete with a fake dead body, for just 54 rupees. But Beale didn't want to win just by luck or doubt. He wanted the whole thing to be cleared up. However, he said, they can prove anything with the servant's evidence, and I only have my word. This happened about a month before the case would go to court, and besides agreeing with Beale, there wasn't much we could do. The only thing we were sure of was that the local witnesses would say things bad enough to ruin Beale's name forever, because when a local starts to lie, they lie completely. They don't worry about the small details. Someone at the table where we were talking said, "I don't trust lawyers. Let's send a message to Strickland and ask him to come help us." Strickland was about 180 miles away. He had just gotten married to Miss Yoel, but when he got the message, he saw it as a chance to do the detective work he loved. When he came and heard our story, he smoked his pipe and said, "We need to look at the evidence." The Uriah servant, the Muslim cook, and the sweeper maid, I guess, are the key witnesses. I'll help, but I'm a bit out of practice. He stood up, went into Beale's room where his suitcase was, and shut the door. An hour later, we heard him say, "I didn't want to get rid of my old costumes when I got married." How does this look? There was a dirty-looking fakir, a beggar, bowing in the doorway. "Now, give me 50 rupees, Strickland said, "and promise you won't tell my wife." He got what he asked for and left the house while we drank to his health. Only Strickland knew what he did next. A fakir stayed near Bronkhorst's house for 12 days. Then a sweeper showed up. When Beale heard about him, he said Strickland was a hero. Whether the sweeper was sweet-talking John Key, Mrs. Bronkhorst's maid, is a question only Strickland knows the answer to. Strickland came back after 3 weeks and said calmly, "You were right, Beale. The whole thing was fake from start to finish." Wow! Even I'm surprised. That Bronkhorst man doesn't deserve to live. There was a lot of noise and shouting, and Beale asked, "How are you going to prove it? You can't tell them you were sneaking around Bronkhorst's house in disguise." "No," said Strickland. "Tell your lawyer to focus on talking about things that don't make sense and how the evidence doesn't match. He won't need to say much, but it will make him feel important. I'll handle the rest." Beale stayed quiet, and the other men waited to see what Strickland would do. They trusted him because he was a calm and quiet man. When the case started, the court was full of people. Strickland waited outside the court until he saw the servant. He whispered a blessing like a fakir and asked how the servant's second wife was. The servant turned around, and when he saw Astrikan Sahib Strickland, his mouth fell open in shock. You have to remember, before Strickland got married, he was very respected by the local people. Strickland quietly said a local saying, meaning he knew everything that was going on, and then he went into the court with a horse trainer's whip. The servant was the first witness, and Strickland smiled at him from the back of the court. The servant licked his lips nervously. He was so scared of Astrikan Sahib that he changed everything he had said before. He told the court that he was a poor man and that God was his witness that he had forgotten everything Bronkhorst had told him to say. He was so terrified of Strickland, the judge, and Bronkhorst that he started to cry. Then the other witnesses began to panic. John Key, the maid, turned pale behind her veil, and the bearer, servant, ran out of the court, saying his mother was dying. He didn't want to tell lies in front of Astrikan Sahib. Beale politely asked Bronkhorst, "Your witnesses aren't helping you. Don't you have any fake letters to show?" But Bronkhorst was sitting in his chair, shaking, and everything went quiet after Beale was asked to stop. Bronkhorst's lawyer saw the look on his client's face, threw his papers on the table, and mumbled something about being given the wrong information. The whole court started cheering loudly, like soldiers at a play, and the judge began to say what he thought. Beale came out of the court, and Strickland left the horsewhip outside. 10 minutes later, Beale was beating Bronkhorst behind the old court cells, quietly and without making a big scene. Bronkhorst was badly hurt and had to be sent home in a carriage. His wife cried over him and took care of him until he became healthy again. Later, after Beale managed to keep quiet the accusation that Bronkhorst had made up false evidence, Mrs. Bronkhorst, with her soft, sad smile, said that there had been a mistake, but it wasn't all her Teddy's fault. She said she would wait until her Teddy came back to her. Maybe he had gotten tired of her, or maybe she had annoyed him. She asked the people at the station not to ignore her anymore and hoped the mothers would let their children play with little Teddy again. He was feeling so lonely. Then the people at the station started inviting Mrs. Bronkhorst to places again until Bronkhorst was ready to come out in public. After that, he went back to England and took his wife with him. According to the latest news, Teddy did come back to her and they are somewhat happy. But, of course, he will never really forgive her for the beating he got because of her.